administrative type items. Specifically because this is a town work session, we wanted the ability for the town council or the town board members to be here tonight and for us to have a good opportunity for education and dialogue. So before we kind of kick off tonight's thing, I'm going to just do a quick roll call and call the time, and then we're going to get into kind of the meat and potatoes of our presentation tonight, okay? So a fairly simple stuff. Meg Lefebvre is here, correct?
Here.
All right. Bart Hebert?
Here.
Chuck Kostick, I know, is at training, so he's not here tonight. Ricky? Jim Coffey is not here tonight. And Tom, are you here?
I'm here somewhere.
Okay. All right. What I'm going to ask for is was anyone seeking to provide public comment this evening? Usually during the work sessions, we provide opportunity for public comment. I didn't anticipate that there would probably be much tonight. If anything, there will be opportunity for you folks to engage in some conversation about the subject matter, 6 o'clock. So with that, what I would like to do is to thank in advance our Planning and Community Development Department. They've done a lot of legwork into this particular subject matter. So Trevor, Melena, Michelle, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to a productive evening. This is a subject matter that a lot of time and energy has been spent on, and without further ado, I'm going to kick it right over to Trevor and his team so we can stay on task. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you everybody for coming. Looks like we have a nice mix of folks here. We got obviously town board members, we have codes enforcement officer, we have the county health department represented here, as well as the county planning department. We've invited some of these folks to kind of help us just have this conversation. The format for tonight is going to be pretty open. We're going to curate the beginning of it so that we all have a common understanding of the topic, lay the groundwork for what we're here talking about, and then dig in a little deeper. The town board had asked our department to flesh this concept out a little bit more. Obviously in communities around the state and the country, short-term rentals, things like Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, they're getting really popular. I myself have used them. Anybody here used those formats before? So a few people have used them. And we know they're occurring in the town of Plattsburgh, but certainly Clinton County, the city of Plattsburgh. Regionally, we're not even sure if it's an issue that's a problem, a great thing, but we think we should explore it now before we don't understand it. So we've kind of set up a format tonight where, could I invite our specialists up and I can introduce you folks? I'll give you a caveat. None of these folks that we've invited are...
One of the only ones standing up.
I'll introduce you folks. None of these folks are here on behalf of any format. I cherry-picked them because of their individual knowledge of particular topics, and maybe you guys can introduce yourselves. You start with Drew.
My name's Drew Arthur. I'm Codes Enforcement Officer for the Town of Plattsburgh.
Rodney Brown, I'm the Deputy Administrator and Planning Director for Clinton County.
Yep. Ryan Davies with the Clinton County Health Department.
Brian Dowling, the assessor for the town of Plattsburgh.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'd also invited Vicki Drew, who's a manager of La Quinta Hotel, kind of to have that perspective. She was unable to attend, as well as Christy Kennedy from the Clinton County Chamber of Commerce, Adirondack Coast Visitors Bureau. We have some interesting information too that we thought would be valuable, but she was also unable to attend, but shared some of that information that they have with us. So maybe we could jump right in and just talk about some background. Not advancing. No, for no reason at all. Oh, are we not? I didn't push. Let's figure something out. I bet the freeze button is on. Let's try it. I've never hit the freeze button, so I don't know. Well, it says
This button's now off.
Technology and government
It says
is always
freeze on the
working.
bottom.
He usually never has trouble with this. Of all the people that we do it.
There.
Do you want a hammer?
Now try.
You need a hammer.
Let's close it and open it.
Computers and hammers go together very well.
I don't panic anymore.
No, you can't.
That part of me died long ago. Kind of cool.
Trevor, go with the puppet show alternate.
Not trying that at all.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll come back. We'll enjoy this time together. Anybody know any songs? Michelle's name.
You do? I need to bring in batteries, so it gives me time to put it in.
I would.
Cashman, any public service announcements?
Thank you.
too long.
Great time to go there, right during the meeting.
So you have it memorized?
Campaign speeches?
No.
And we're impressing the high school students here.
Yeah.
This is how it really is.
They probably could do your computer thing for you.
This is how it actually works in government.
Serving on all the-
I have no answers. I don't know why it was called.
Yes, you
We only have opinions.
Performance anxiety.
Is it advancing on the streamline?
Just to, you just go on tours.
We're coming back here. We can alternate screens.
It's legal now to know.
So embarrassing.
Trevor usually wants teaching us how to do stuff.
Make better decisions in the world and where we end up.
I know. No, that always works. I'm not sure what I think it's a- What's that?
Poetry.
Yeah, I have no idea.
You know, it's funny, it's our laptop, and I touch the screen and nothing happens.
The nation does trust that he will.
Your buddy's Dan?
And they still, they still have some
Is it
skill.
real buddy or? Oh, really?
You can go
You guys are liked, be careful.
enjoy
Sorry.
with them.
Well, you got some.
Something they heard you make.
It's gonna be separate.
Not the nation.
So they understand that they need these structures. They take you to.
Sorry, Kev, we lost you. We lost Kev.
Okay, Sean, you can punch this.
Stuff, and you see.
You spend loads of time, you know, by
Yeah,
heart.
we have, Debbie, but I prefer to do it this way.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, especially when you get down, I can see him overanalyzing everything. Want too many conversations, you do
no, there isn't.
He's getting ready to retire.
Come on, you guys.
Been there a while. Bridget had like, the end this year, I think. No, I don't want having pressure either. Like you said.
Besides which,
Very,
okay,
Some kind of computers.
he's very interested, very smart.
It's not some kind of computers and cell phones.
Yeah.
For the one time, I don't have to leave at a certain time. I just stay here. Skip one.
Take different paths.
So high school kids.
Quite like, that's why my band that we're over here.
What time?
Here.
I believe it. Probably will know.
We're back now.
There's no ice there anymore.
Okay, see? It wasn't so bad. Get through it.
It's like a tour from each of the.
From Norway.
So, let's all get on the same page on what we're talking about. Short-term rentals are typically rentals that are less than 30 days, often in people's homes, apartments, but these days they range from everything to tents to cabins and anything in between. But what we kind of want to use is that definition tonight, because this is primarily what they are, with our research over, many of these regulations. The 30-day is typically one of the major thresholds, because beyond that, you're renting month to month, basically. So, and obviously they become popular, and we all know that story. So we'll hop along. The statistics here, in Clinton County, we have about 140. Could be a little more, a little less. They obviously vary, people take them off the market, and it may not also include people who just aren't registered on Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway. And then there are plenty of folks who do that through word of mouth. And also Craigslist has a version 2, which isn't easy to search, so. The statistics are the best we can get. And it's kind of impressive with these guests. $5,200 a year is kind of the average in Clinton County that people are making off doing this, which is a pretty good second income depending on how many nights a year you do it. And this ranges. I saw just before this meeting there was in West Plattsburgh a $30 Airbnb for a 1-bedroom. And then on the lake, they range from $100 to $350, $450 a night, depending if it's a beautiful lake house or not. So the range is really wide. So if you're doing $30 a night, it's going to take you a while to do $200, obviously. Again, actually, before I tell this, Rodney, would you be able to elaborate a little bit on the county's taxation of that format?
What I don't know is how I think they rely on these folks contacting them, although they do scour the ads in the computer looking for people who are renting these. The county does have a tax, a hotel tax or a bed tax on places of lodging, and they recently revised it to include these type of short-term rental units. So they are included. It's per night, and they register with Clinton County, and they provide amounts. It's somewhat on the honor system, just like it is with all the hotels and motels. How many nights times how many people, and we are getting several Airbnbs that comply. I don't think as many as you just listed on there, but I do know our treasurer's office is scouring and looking for those type of ads.
Thank you. And that's at 3% of that. So the revenue, which on the next slide when we get to it, you'll see some interesting revenue coming in. But the North Country Chamber of Commerce has kind of been tasked with using that bed tax to promote tourism in the region. The Adirondack Coast Visitors Bureau is able to use that money. And the bed tax, you have to remember, comes from also hotels. So it's a much larger dollar amount. The amount that's coming from short-term rentals is much smaller than what's collected. And you'll see those numbers in the next slide, I think.
Before we move on, do you want Brian to expand on the requirement from Clinton County Health Department for any residents of renting out people?
Sure.
Or more?
So basically, the health department will regulate hotels, motels, and cabin colonies per subpart 7-1. So that is mostly right what Trevor has up there, but we do have an exception in our code that says a temporary residence, which could be the situation, consisting of a single occupancy unit, so one house, rented in its entirety for common use by a group. So say people rent a whole house and there's 25 people there, that would not be regulated by the county health department. It'd be more like your Holiday Inn or a cabin colony or separate individual units that you can rent. So
As
that's
long
the
as it's not
clarification.
one structure.
Exactly.
Okay.
Are there inspections for that? Do you do inspections like you would at hotels? And
So only if we permit it. So otherwise, I think it might be the code officer or maybe only during the initial construction. But
Right, yeah, currently New York State doesn't have any regulations. It's something that they've talked about and they're in works on, but it's not anywhere within the codes to have these, as currently they're single-family residents and not multifamily or, which are, which we inspect every 18 months to 36 months.
And that brings a good point up about what this whole event is about, is not really telling you folks what our ideas for regulation are. It's really collecting ideas and figuring out, one, whether we need it and what the possibilities are for that. Because there are, like I said, good templates out there. And part of this is we may discover over time that we do need some type of permitting process or regulation, but this is part of that discovery phase. So here's some numbers that we have so far for bed tax collected, and you'll see quite a jump in each of these years, likely for very different reasons. From 2016 to 2017, I can speculate, since that bed tax wasn't collected yet, the airport increased dramatically, and in traffic, and the economy turned around dramatically in those years too. So general travel increased probably nationwide. But you'll see in 2018, which is when they started collecting that tax, there was another significant jump, and the economy had already turned around. The airport did increase as well. Pure speculation, but I wouldn't doubt that part of that $597,000 had a small component was due to collecting another form of tax.
Trevor, one quick point, the bed tax that the county collects goes principally to the Chamber of Commerce for promotion of Clinton County and for tourism purposes. The amount that the county does retain, over $400,000 a year goes to the chamber. The amount that the county does retain goes into a fund that we use to help get more airlines at Plattsburgh International Airport. So none of the money goes to our general fund for general use. It has specific targeted uses.
And this is kind of this moment where we, now you kind of get down to now who we talking about. We've got the background about, you know, what's kind of going on in our community, but who does it really affect? And I asked people to raise their hand earlier about who has used, you know, these formats. And, you know, several people raised their hands, but you know, there's more stakeholders, I guess, than just people who use Airbnb or VRBO. There's folks in the community. And anybody want to brainstorm a little bit about who else might be affected by short-term rental properties? Anybody got anything to throw out there?
Neighbors.
Neighbors?
Communities.
Communities as a
Yeah,
whole, like,
mhm.
you know, he
Like
said.
Cliff Haven,
Sure.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
a small
particular-
community.
The character of a community, maybe? Who else might be involved?
I'd be interested, when you say neighbors, it's an obvious one, but have you guys any particular experience with it? I'd like to hear what kind of impacts that you're receiving from these.
I want to reserve that for a
Oh.
special moment.
Okay.
Haven't gone to that slide.
We will definitely
I didn't get that memo.
We will definitely get there, and I want to, at this point, keep it broad. We'll get very specific, so let's try to avoid addresses until that point. What about, who else might be involved with stakeholder? I'd say emergency services. You know, there's different folks in your community that come in. They might not be used to local laws or regulations, speed zones, things like that.
Sure, I want to throw one out just because I'm talking with Vicky from La Quinta. They've been doing a lot of research too. The hotels, you know, have a very significant interest just in competition in the marketplace, as well as what the standards that they have for their business versus folks that are, you know, able to do with the individual homes. So.
Yeah, if you think about it, this model provides a completely different type of rental experience that would directly compete. It really provides, most of the hotels are very similar to each other. This provides something completely different for a segment of the population that, you know, wants an entire unit or something by the lake, you know, places where you generally don't find the hotels in the Clinton County area.
I was saying, I mean, this has been going on just in different forms for, you know, years, but now obviously since technology's come along, it's a lot more readily available to individuals across the country, so it provides a whole new aspect to it, and it's increasing more and more along the way.
I'm not sure if we thought about it before either, but law enforcement,
Right.
being aware of where those properties are, and just knowing that they're more transit properties rather than maybe permanent homes that people are aware of. What do we have on our list?
I think Drew has a point. Kind of on Cumberland Head, and on Cumberland Head, it used to be full of little cottages, which were rented out. I mean, when I was a child, and I'm 68, so, you know, it was a few years ago, were rented out always in the summertime for a month, you know, a couple of weeks, because they were on the lake. It's not a new concept.
No, not at all. I mean, there's
It's
lot
a new concept only in that we have internet now, so it's more.
The digital
accessible.
format of it and the far-reaching nature of it, you know, now you can have people traveling from California who might normally stay in a hotel, now stay in a neighborhood, where in the past it might have been regional.
I would say though, that model, that families that used to come for a month often repeat, come back next summer, get to know the neighbors, it becomes kind of a summer community within itself. This provides a one night or a weekend of people coming in who say it's gonna be 4 people and it ends up being 20 people in the house. Lots of different things than just.
Dive right in, because that's number 2, you know,
Yeah.
what are the impacts to stakeholders?
Sure.
So what are you thinking about, Margot? What kind of impacts?
Well, certainly, the serenity of the neighborhood changes dramatically. Safety of children in the neighborhood, people who aren't invested in, the regulations and things like that, that a community kind of has along those lines.
Parking on your neighborhood,
Pardon?
parking.
Oh, extremely so, yes, and using facilities that might have been for the community, and taking over spots that would have been, that a I'm referring to Cliff Haven, so I might as well be clear about that. You know, there's a beach there and things like that. Pretty soon, other people are there having fires and things like that, when you kind of got policies in your community that you make reservations and this picnic tables take a bit, all of a sudden this group of people comes in and they're not abiding by any of the rules that communities have set up.
One that I'll flip the script a little bit, another, the impact of it is travelers, right? Because it's another choice, so, they're, oddly enough, they're a stakeholder, there's someone else who's coming into your community and experiencing it a different way too. And I might throw out a flip positive impact on them is they might get an authentic experience in your community and actually see some nice part of your neighborhood that if you stayed uptown in a hotel you might not see. You might know that Clarion Carl's is there, you know. It's just the inverse of what another impact might be.
Trevor, expanding on the neighbors, I guess, some communities have homeowner associations, so I think it's stakeholders.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
what Mark was talking about.
And we'll dive into that a little later too, where, you know, one of the issues is covenants, homeowner association regulations cover a lot of different things too. So, we kind of broke this out in a few buckets, and then we'll dive into this and start collecting some ideas too, but obviously there's benefits, right? So we'll presume that there's benefits, and then we'll also presume that there might be issues. And, trying to stay on a positive note first, and then we'll dive into the other part. Did you have something, Mike?
Rodney had asked this couple here to speak about the impacts, and I don't think that they had a
Okay.
chance to do that.
Sure.
Are we at that point?
Yeah, no, I mean.
We are now.
I wanna collect as much, and I don't want you to lose an idea, so this is pretty organic, there's not a lot of us here.
So the experience that we have is kind of mixed because we're directly above an Airbnb and there's another one right up the road from us too. So, and the uniqueness of that property is there's multiple homes, I guess, on the property. So there's multiple areas that are rented out, and one of which happens to be directly out my back door. So, you know, we get, sometimes in the winter, we get people that are there for 6 months, you know, for the whole winter or a couple of months. There's kind of some consistent people, and then during the summer, it's, you know, 1 day, 2 day, 1 week. So, you know, the experience is walking out every morning and seeing a new person sitting in a lawn chair staring across your lawn at the lake. You know, so, you know, and parties, and it's not a horrendous thing, but it, you know, it's just it definitely impacts the nature of what, you know, what we were buying when we bought our property as a single family residential district. You know, I didn't buy a house next to a hotel, but I have a house next to a hotel.
Well, it's interesting, because a single-family residential neighborhood, and many of the ones that are impacted locally, but even certainly nationwide, those happen to be really attractive to the traveling folks who think they're gonna be safer, more comfortable in a single-family residential neighborhood, maybe versus a downtown. And they're attractive for both parties, but, you know, a single-family residential neighborhood is certainly a lot different than a multifamily and a short-term rental, so it's, you have a non-permanent neighbor, you know.
Yeah.
Rotating cast of neighbors, right?
Yeah, and I think the point was brought up that I live in Cumberland Head, and on Cumberland Head, it's known for having cabins and rentals and those, and I feel like in the past, we haven't been there that long, but before the, you know, Airbnb era, I think people stayed for a month. They stayed for a couple of weeks, and you kind of had some consistency in that, and it was expected. The neighbors, you know, expected certain people to show up every summer and be there with their dogs, and, you know, not have a different dog every week. Yeah, and that's, and obviously there's rules in place that the neighbors have,
That's
and
wanna hold that one, pets.
Yeah.
We had not thought about
Yeah,
that at
that's
all,
good.
but strange pets, because animals really interact differently with, you show up in the road, they gotta meet again and sniff each other again. And
Yeah.
that's an interesting one I hadn't thought of.
And they don't we don't know, I mean, if my neighbor on Cumberland Head is required to register their pet and get their shots with the town, but the person that just shows up with a dog randomly next door, I have no idea what their township is required, and I don't even know what our township requires of their dogs while they're visiting our area. So, with children and pets that we have, it's, yeah, and we see the positive stuff too, because we have the fishermen that show up, for the fishing tournaments, and that's a huge boost to our economy. There's no way that the hotels can support that from what I can, maybe they can, but, I mean, that's a huge overflow of the hotels on those weekends when we have fishing tournaments. And they stay next door, and they're probably the best tenants
A lot of
that
them
we
bring
have.
their families most of the time.
Yeah,
Stay for the whole week, which is, and we've seen a couple of the same ones here and there over the last couple of years, but in my opinion, it's been much more of a negative experience than a positive one. I do not let my daughter go outside and play by herself ever, because we never know who's next door, ever. It's always a revolving door.
What neighborhood are you in?
Safety.
Now, just I guess a question, I mean, this is out of pure curiosity. Do you guys see a difference between people that rent for 1 and 2 nights versus people that rent for a week or 2 weeks? I'm guessing is time like a barrier that, you see a difference with people?
it's not, I guess it's easier when you see the same car show up, but not really, I don't know,
Because you never know who's in,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's just pure,
I guess it probably doesn't make a difference, no.
okay.
to me, it does not.
The winters are a little easier, because you really, it's usually construction workers or something, so you see the same truck every day, and they're usually gone.
So the owners are never there?
No.
This is a complete rental unit?
Correct. The owner shows up, who's unfortunately a very nice person, and I really like him. I just don't really like what he does there. But he shows up, I don't know, half a dozen times a year or something like that, stays for a while.
Right, but we wouldn't say that place is owner occupied.
No, he lives in Florida.
And then that's a big part of what we found in regulations to mitigate impact.
Well, I'm just gonna expand to Rodney's question, how we see a difference. I've had in Cliff Haven, a neighbor having to move. They had to sell their house. They tried to mitigate things with the owner of the house next door, but they ended up having to leave because they could not enjoy their home anymore. And that's pretty serious. And I think that there's some concern that that's happening more and more. In Cliff Haven, I'll say that more of these houses are showing up. And they're so close to each other that visitors who are in for the weekend really don't care that they're up till 4 in the morning. And even if the police are called, even if they come out, quiet down for a few minutes, and then the music comes back up again, because they're not coming back again. So it doesn't matter to them. And they may have booked for one family coming in, but it turns out to be a whole lot more than the one family who takes the house. And, I saw that 11 up there. I've seen 20 people in a house, So
Crowded.
it's pretty serious when people sell their homes and they move to Cumberland Head, but,
I can support,
Definitely
from my,
like that.
Ryan, you wanna chime in?
I can support from, his perspective, the absentee ownership.
Yeah.
For the houses along there, they don't live in this community.
And obviously the conversation was going to the issues, so we jumped ahead. Maybe if we find a benefit, we'll go back. Brian, would you want to, Rodney just mentioned property value. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit? What you know about how it affects property values?
You would have to, and not only do I do assessment, but I do appraisal. And in either kind of valuation of the property, we have to have a value impact provided. And there is no concrete data that says that the house is being either positively or negatively impacted by the sales, because those sales aren't happening with these homes. In Cliff Haven, the sales took place and they were at market, and then the houses were converted into Airbnb units. So does this increase the value of that property or decrease the value of its neighbor? I don't have anything concrete in a cash value kind of thing to indicate such a thing at this time. It would be a little bit down the road, but you're not going to see, unless, like Marco says, the neighbor goes. And does the market generate that value, or was it because the new buyer says, hey, I can do the same thing and put in another Airbnb, you know? So I'm gonna pay a little extra for that house. You can't tell. There's nothing in my books that would indicate
Well, I
a
think
plus or a negative.
I think what that interesting piece of info points out that, but you're not at all saying that when it doesn't affect the personal value of the home, but it may not actually impact the economic value of the home.
It's gonna take years to see those trends.
Right.
And somebody comes to buy a house next to an Airbnb, I suspect the owners are not advertising the fact that there's an Airbnb next door. It may be an unsuspecting owner buying a property at the highest value, then realizing, you know, that there's maybe some issues.
Due diligence on your purchase when you're looking at.
It's the same thing as going in and being next to a neighbor that is obnoxious, yet they live there all year round. You know, you have the same thing that they force someone out too. You don't know until.
And we're talking here right now primarily leak influence, but there was a house in one of our normal neighborhoods. He was doing it bedroom wise, and he made so much money they sold the house, and they're often wandering off in the Caribbean island now. So and then you look at the value of that house, and it's a typical residential house. It's the same value as the rest of those neighborhood houses are. Yet at the same time, I found out later 2 of his bedrooms were being rented out on an Airbnb kind of style. Somebody comes in for a meeting or something, they rented it, they used the guy's kitchen, he lived in the basement. It happening over here on Pine Brook, where we have she brings them in, they have this section bedroom and bathroom, and gets to use the kitchen, and coffee in the morning and pastries in the morning she provides. So the value of that house, the neighbor isn't saying anything. They go in, they buy the house next door, they don't realize this is happening. So there's
Brian,
a lack of
can
information.
the inverse happen, where a property value goes up because of the revenue being generated?
Well, that's a possibility now. If it continues to be in the manner that we see, then somebody might say that house next to Margot says, you know, I can spend market value for that and make $200 a night for the summer.
You have to use an income approach.
Right. And, well, you're gonna find that I started putting on you can go, anybody can go down to the county now and they'll be able to open up the file and it's gonna have notes. And then you open the notes and it says VRBO, $250 a night, times X number of nights, 122 is what I've been using, equals this much cash. This cash is converted into a value. Now, do I add the value to the present value of the house, or do you say that's part of the value of that property? I don't know how to do this yet. All I'm doing is making sure that if somebody goes in and looks it up on the computer at the county even, they'll understand that, oh, look at this neighbor, what's this note? Look it up, oh, that guy sells Airbnb, or he sells VRBO, so that somebody's aware that they're walking into that kind of situation, because Rodney's absolutely right. Is the realtor gonna divulge this? You know, should the realtor be obligated to divulge this? Or FSBO, for sale by owner, is that owner gonna divulge this? You don't know. And yes, it could possibly raise the value of the property, because now you know you can get a cash flow from it. I can move out for 4 months and make my $28,000 and move back in.
And I would just like to expand, Rodney, you commented that it may or may not change a neighborhood. I'm trying to pull back what it was you were saying. But in this small community, in Plattsburgh, in the North Country, I think change could happen very quickly if this catches on, and it's not regulated. I mean, I'm all for it, and I love having people come to love the North Country as much as I do. But unless we get a handle on things, it could really change our community dramatically. If we're looking at all these lake properties being abandoned by families and then taken over by Airbnbs.
Well, I think your concerns are at the heart of it. I mean, even at the local level, I think we've tried hard to create community, and certainly at the neighborhood level, which is like my personal unit that I care most about, because those are the places where we live. Short-term rentals have the potential, that format has the potential to dramatically change the character and reason why you would live in a neighborhood. The whole idea is usually that you know your neighbors, you are aware of who's usually around, right? There's a whole host of things that come with a neighborhood, the whole value that you get from that, and, you know, that's one of those things.
And
I
isn't
just-
there different zoning if you're gonna put in a hotel or motel versus whether you're gonna have everybody come in your house? We have zoning now. Is this violating zoning?
It's not violating zoning though, because it's a single family unit, it's a
I
single family
get you,
residence,
but
that's what it
the
is.
uses are similar.
Could violate zoning, depends how you write the
Yeah.
zoning.
Yeah.
Well,
Right there.
I think one of the things that we've been doing in trying to do a lot of research, and we will touch eventually upon other communities and means to help address this, is one, there's no silver bullet, right? I mean, I think it just needs to be recognized that there's no one solution to it. But the other part of it is, by putting forward certain standards, is standards that can actually be used to leverage success. Okay, and what I mean is, as we all know, there's many laws out there, right, that people just don't follow. Right? I mean, just honestly, I mean, and then what I think intensifies the frustration of people is people go, well, there's a law on the books, why aren't you doing this? But if there isn't the resources to actually, you know, to address it in that way, it doesn't do anything either. So trying to find, you know, the various tools that are realistic for the community. And what I think, you know, I just want to amplify one thing that Trevor said. The town of Plattsburgh, as you know, our own township is very unique because we're very hamlet driven. And I think we also need to be mindful of what may work really, really well in Cliff Haven may not work in Cumberland Head or Morrisonville or Katyville. And while a lot of these communities, you know, we were talking about the lake as being, some people like coming up to the North Country because of the more, you know, rural, kind of getting in the woods, you know, being close to, you know, various things. So you know, that's why we're taking our time and attention to not just snap to a judgment, because this is moving pretty quickly.
But to extend to your comment, Michael, I think as public officials, what we face is, by hearing the personalized messages from our residents and stuff, is getting regulation and having the zoning ordinances match, but it's the enforcement aspect that I get the feedback on. So
Yeah.
you've got these statutes, you've got this, and
Yeah.
so why aren't you enforcing it? So I just wanna amplify that.
At 3 in the morning, Drew.
We discussed this a little bit, and I'll let Drew.
I mean, that's from our point, I mean, as the zoning officials, it's like, it's a very hard thing to really enforce, because, well, currently there is nothing on the books in New York State, local laws, anything like that to enforce. But it's hard to say, well, is that person related to the owner? Well, if they're related to the owner, then there's nothing to enforce. And there's, you know, there's all these situations where people try to find their way around it, and knowing that this person is here at this time, is renting and not allowed, and how many days they are and aren't, it's a hard thing to enforce, and that's what you're finding around the country is, it's become a topic, but the enforcement of it is, it's a tricky thing at this point in time, and I think that's why, you know, we're starting this conversation early, and I think there is ways to help mitigate it, but I don't think you're ever gonna get it completely, yeah.
Well, and we don't know that eradicated is what needs to be done, but we do know that there are existing issues.
Yeah, I mean, there's the benefits of it, of the fact that, you know, you do get people up into the North Country and spending money that may not be here normally, and you get people that will fall in love and say, you know what, I wanna buy a piece of property here because we vacation here and we love it so much, and then that brings more, so you get those benefits. You get the benefits, obviously, of, you know, for some of the residents of being able to offset their taxes because they might not be able to afford to keep their home if they don't, you know, get some kind of extra income from it, so you get that, you know. But is there a certain amount of time and that kind of thing, and that's where I think, you know, we have to start looking at.
Yeah, and I do think, Tom, you mentioned zoning. So zoning isn't typically a good tool to, address short-term rentals because zoning sets area dimensions and typical areas of use, like even the idea of a single-family residential. You can call it that, but really what that is one unit per given amount of space to layer and set up a typical neighborhood shape and character. What you can't regulate through zoning is terms of ownership. And how you lease, rent, because a rental can be by the month, or theoretically by the day. But local laws can drill down further than that, and that's really the tool that gets to issues like health. And it made me think of another one. We mentioned Cumberland Head a lot. Cliff Haven gets talked about, but Cumberland Head has a unique set of issues that it doesn't have public sewer. And you know, I hope Ryan can chime in, but it wasn't really on our list necessarily about health from the aspect, or even say the lake, that you may have a 2-bedroom camp that was designed for a leach field and a septic system of a given size, but if it's advertised with enough couches and futons and fold-outs as an 8-bedroom or a 10-person rental for the weekend, and it has a tent out back or a camper, then what?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where, yeah, we design our septic systems based on number of bedrooms. So you anticipate X number of gallons per day. Sure, it can handle additional wastewater flows for a short duration, but if you're running it out to 20 people for 2 months, do we have sewage on the ground? Is it a public health hazard? Is it polluting the lake? That's something that is a concern.
And does the permitting process now through the county touch that at all? Or
Absolutely not. So if we permit a new septic system, we get a plan that says we have X number of bedrooms, we review it in accordance with our code, and we approve it. We don't investigate. Usually, you're always expected to have 20 people at your house at 4th of July or something, but the code takes that into account, not 3 months or
Right, so
whatever.
the structure was reviewed, not the terms of ownership.
Yeah, we don't touch that whatsoever. I don't ask.
And
What do
just,
you do?
just a question to the people that obviously have them around, are the places that are being used, are they places that have been around for a while, or are they newer construction, houses?
Been around for a while. This gentleman's issue is, the house has been around a long time.
Oh, yeah, okay, so, yeah,
And
so therefore, you know, therefore we get into the situation, you know,
And that
kids are
septic
older, so it
system
was
has
on
not been
completely different calculations too, so, you know.
So
Hey,
that
good
just
haven.
haven't added since.
They've been there a long time.
Right.
What'd you have, Deb?
I was gonna say, one of the big problems, I think, in how to regulate Airbnb or any short-term rentals is that this is private property. Private property is the backbone of America.
Well, you have your rights.
Yes. And so how tightly do you wanna regulate and restrict and zone people's private property?
You can't.
And I went to a seminar, as you know, last year about Airbnb short-term rentals. And it was presented by an attorney, and I asked our attorney to look into it. It's not here yet. And by and large, most regulations are struck down when they're going to court. Now, not all. It depends on how you make the regulations, how you zone. Unfortunately, much of this comes down on the shoulders of the zoning officials. Did you do it right? Did you not do it right? What did you say? What does your zoning, yada, 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 and they are thrown out. New York City tried to regulate Airbnb, saying that Any kind of rental less than 30 days was prohibited unless the owner was there, struck down in January, thrown out of court. So over and over and over again, because this is private property and people are trying to regulate others' private property, these got thrown.
I think what it gets
Thrown out,
down
thrown
to
out.
is, I'll throw out Trevor Cole's personal opinion about regulation. The minimum amount necessary to mitigate community-wide impacts, negative community-wide impacts. Typically is probably the best first approach, and then if the impacts aren't resolved, then you try to regulate more or enforce more, because regulation's kind of irrelevant without enforcement, right?
But are you gonna ask, are your zoning officials to come out at 3 in the morning because someone's having a big party? I mean,
Yeah, I don't
enforcement has
know.
always been an issue with noise,
I hope he
mean,
doesn't have
et
to.
cetera, et cetera, you know, we only have so many people.
Oh, so then that's when it goes to local law enforcement. And that's
Actually,
where,
yeah, that's another impact right there, is how do you enforce?
Well, and that's really what I was trying to get at to begin with is, you know, there is that chain of where does it go eventually. You know, you can do some things in advance to maybe prevent or encourage a higher standard of community living. You know, honestly, we have some people, I get phone calls in my office and people are like, I hate my neighbor next door. Okay, I'm sorry. And, you know, as the town supervisor, I do not have the ability to mend the relationship with that. But in today's society, it can be very hard that, and it can be different things. It can be the dog barking, it can be what time the person's mowing their lawn, it can be the fact that their sister-in-law parks on the shoulder of the shared driveway, right? I mean, there's many different things there.
Could be burning things they're not supposed to be burning next door.
Sure, so, but I think that's, you know, and that's where we even get into the thing, and I'll volley it up there. The town of Plattsburgh has noise ordinance. And this is a really, I think, a good comparison to it. It's out there, and we are reliant largely on the sheriff's department and state police, but they have limited resources too. And so it doesn't mean that we don't have a tool in the toolbox, but it doesn't guarantee that the tool is going to be used in every situation when the person wants it to be used though too.
What about this one here? We haven't talked about the housing stock issue, which, you know, we're at, house sales are kind of through the roof right now as far as the value that they're going for. Brian would probably be able to chime in, maybe even Drew, because he's going out inspecting these buildings as they're being built. But it's probably less of a crisis issue locally, but many other places nationwide, these things are so profitable to have if you already own them. And if you can make $5,000 a month versus, you know, it kind of makes sense for a lot of people to move out of the neighborhood, get an apartment somewhere else, and they're living pretty well. And so other places it's caused that issue. I think it's a neighborhood issue here maybe. I'm just kind of throwing that out there that you might want to go move into a neighborhood, but if there's 5, 6, 7, 8 houses locked up that are rentals now only, and short-term rentals at that, that's kind of, you know, it changes people, it eliminates maybe opportunity to that home ownership on certain properties, maybe opportunity to have permanent residence in a neighborhood.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Without the attorney being here, without getting into a lengthy legal description, the town of Plattsburgh specifically, because I've looked at it a lot, has very specific uses in very specific zoning areas. So why does a use of a hotel not fall into, why can't zoning help with with the problem? Because it's clearly, a hotel is clearly not allowed in an R2, right? But that is the use of that property. So zoning is two different things, right? Zoning is the structure that's being built as well as the use of that structure. So why doesn't the use category of zoning help in these situations? Where's the
If you
instruction?
had drilled down on that thought 9 years ago, you'd be a billionaire because you'd own Airbnb. They clearly understand that zoning isn't the tool that regulates uses that way. Because a hotel is this, very clearly defined thing that has to do with other laws that would be better in Ryan's. We can't define a hotel. We can, but our definition really has to match what a health department and a state term for that use is, a temporary occupancy.
Temporary residence.
Could you describe that, please?
Yeah, so basically it's gonna be a temporary residence that has those 11 or more units essentially, or 11 more occupancies. So, and it also, it goes into, you can't stay in a temporary residence more than 180 days. So once you get into beyond 180 days, I think that's more of a building code thing, that's more of an apartment, a structure. We run into all this time, like, let's take the Macon Motel for example, everyone knows that one.
Really? I don't know that.
I know, right? So people will stay there up to 180 days, but to get around some of the regulation, they have to move around, and it's a shuffle effect, so.
Once every 6 months, they gotta move for one night.
Exactly, so, but that building, it's essentially apartment, but it's not up to building code to meet apartments, so that's why we regulate it as a temporary residence. So that's sort of some of the definition of a.
And local jurisdictions we're really held to some of those definitions. So again, because it's set by case law, that we can regulate the use and area, where the house sits, its 10-foot side yard setback, and all this, but we can't regulate terms of ownership, how an individual rents out their property. But, and then that's again why now communities are looking at this conversation about local laws that drill down deeper into the uses within neighborhoods. It was like a noise ordinance. A noise ordinance is a local law. It wouldn't be proper to put in a zoning code. What R2 zone is 80 decibels, completely unenforceable. So you create a local law that creates another provision. I get your point because it seems obvious. This is a single family neighborhood, right? How can it be a hotel? But
it follows more
Sure.
along, honestly, it follows more along the lines of an Uber, like versus a taxi. You're actually, a taxi is a company that's running for that. Uber, you're sharing your vehicle. You're taking monetary value, but you're sharing your vehicle. So you can do whatever you want with your vehicle, and if the house is in the same situation, it's a single family residence that you're sharing with someone, they happen to give you a monetary value, but it's not a business that you're running.
Trevor, what is the Town of Plattsburgh definition of a single family?
I'd have to pull it out. I mean, I don't have it off the top of my head. Drew's got the word to say.
It's not what most people
We
think it
don't-
is. I mean, I hate to say that.
But we also don't define single family.
Or
We identify
whatever,
family.
a family, yeah.
You're not defining the rights when you purchase it either. When you buy a house, you buy a bundle of rights. You're not just buying the land. You buy the air rights above you, you buy the mineral rights below you. You're buying the right to use, the right to do nothing, the right to rent. So that's where the courts are striking them down, because you have that right. You bought those rights to own that particular, that defined parameter of land.
It might be under single family dwelling.
Trevor, I want to provide an upward perspective in the sense of, other people that are looking at this issue, I think is helpful. Whatever you think, good, bad, or indifferent, okay, but our governor of New York hates Airbnb. I mean, truly hates Airbnb. And one of the reasons is, in New York City, there's rent control, apartments. And what a lot of folks are doing with the rent control apartments are now putting those into Airbnb, and it's creating, so there's.
Making money off of rent control.
Sure, but there's so many different components to this that, you know, it's a really, really complex thing. And I guess I'd put out there from the town's perspective, the reason that we are taking a steady approach to this, we are putting time and energy into researching this and looking at what other communities are. I don't think you ever want the town of Plattsburgh to just go into a situation where we put something forward where we have it in good faith, you know, and I'm not saying that we're perfect, but in this particular subject matter, where folks then turn around and sue the town because we've adopted a local law or some other mechanism, and then people say, no, you're trampling on my rights here, and then as taxpayers, we're defending something that we know either through case law or elsewhere. I mean, there is very high empathy, I can guarantee you that, of the board and the team members here for the issues that you're talking about though, and that's why we're getting into it. So we're trying to find solutions, but recognizing that we probably won't be able to hit on every one of them because there's certain statutory and other limitations to the subject matter, so.
Does anybody have anything else to add quick before we kind of move on to the greatest hits section of ordinances that are kind of popping up?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's multiple things for but a single-family dwelling is a dwelling accommodating or designed to accommodate a single family in one dwelling unit. Single-family dwelling units include modular homes that do not require HUD approval. But a dwelling is any building with one or more rooms with provisions for living, cooking, sanitary, sleeping facilities arranged for the use of one family.
And what is a family?
That is the ultimate question.
Well, I think we do have a family.
I have seen some definitions for family and zoning ordinance,
Ours,
and a lot of them are very different from each other.
Yes,
they
Some-
are.
Some that say, two or more individuals that are related,
Drew's got it.
constitute a
I think
family.
Drew's got it.
Yeah, so an individual or two or more persons related by blood, marriage, or legal adoption, or a group of not more than 6 persons who are not so related, living together as a single housekeeping unit.
And then, exactly,
Well,
so,
cities
So,
as
you know,
well.
6 or more non-related?
but here's why countrywide, we'll definitely move on, because the family issue has been explored to the nth degree. I can tell you we have the safest definition, because thought experiment. Imagine trying to spend your time regulating if you have 2 foster kids, your cousin's living with you, you've remarried and have 2 stepchildren, and grandpa lives with you, and your daughter's child also lives with you. Anybody wanna go break up that family? Because it's, doesn't quite fit the ordinance? I don't think you want Drew going out there and being like, yeah, the foster kid's gotta go. Probably not popular, so.
Or grandpa.
You won't. Grandpa's gotta go. It's probably been said before, but you won't find me very excited about digging in deep to how to regulate the definition of family because it fails. Because of that nuance.
You see the greatest enforcement of that with the college housing, right? Not four or less non-related in the apartment. So that form is, you see in the city, but not out here, because just don't have the student housing population.
And all of that goes, so we'll dive into this a little bit, but I'll tell you one thing that I'm certain of in all this. The only regulation that's gonna work is the one all of us come up with for us, because we've read through many all over the country, and I don't think one of them will work for us. All of them have something pretty good, and you're like, that's a really good component. And then the next is obsessed with lake rights, or, docking, or something that may or may not apply to the neighborhood that we're dealing with. The only one that'll work is the one that everyone here chimes in a good idea about. And the only way I'm convinced to do that is to look first at what is the issue that we wanna mitigate that impact? And then what do you do to regulate that? Rather than go, here's this law that we found in another town to drop into our town.
I'd say, I think we have to be realistic in the fact of, we're not gonna get rid of this, but if we can, I guess, put our ideas into control the chaos, is kind of what we need to do, because it's like, you're never gonna get rid of it completely. If the world's changed and that's the way it is, then you're not gonna get rid of it completely.
Does anybody here rent out their part of their home for temporary rental? They're brave enough to tell us now that everyone apparently does.
I can tell you somebody in my office, staff person does.
Yeah.
Sure, go to the next slide where we show everybody.
If they stay for free, is that a rental?
Cause, what's that?
If they stay for free, is it a rental?
Probably under some definition. And let me first say, I don't do this, and I don't really have a stance on it, other than I've used it 2 or 3 times, and I probably will again this summer, but.
I'll be the bad guy, I do have a Airbnb.
And, what do you think about it? How do you like it?
It's great, it pays our taxes, it gets projects, so we can make sure our house is fixed up.
Yeah, and that's a perspective that we didn't drill, and we quickly moved right past, benefits.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say we probably increased the property value because of the stuff we're able to put back into it by quite a few thousand.
Is that a short-term rental?
Yep, yeah. Yep, we rent it by the week.
Could
But I
we
can-
bounce back to that slide?
But
can-
do
I
you
can
live
go
there?
Hmm?
But do you live there?
At times.
I can
It's
go-
a-
I can
it is
go
a
back,
it's our
though.
family's second house that we rent out.
I can go back to the nineties and renting a camp on Silver Lake. And those, you cannot even get into that, because every year, that same family comes back every week on that particular camp.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
we
so it's been going on, like mentioned earlier, for a very long time. It's just a prominence now in established neighborhoods, where,
Yeah, it's moved into a different form now.
Right, and, you know, so to be circumspect and to give it its just due, we did wanna touch on that obviously a benefit community-wide with the, you know, benefits to tourism and, the next fail.
Next.
Is the increased bed tax, obviously, increased tourism, and that's usually because of the expanded variety and experiences. It baffles me, I didn't understand it at first, but we have many days a year where every hotel room in the town of Plattsburgh is booked on Route 3. And there's many sleeper reasons. People think, yeah, okay, the fishing tournament's okay, college, people traveling to and from Montreal. But we have a lot of corporations here now, and companies like Schluter will book 50 rooms to have a corporate event. Tour buses, I just learned, I was talking with one sales manager of Quinta yesterday, and one of their typical ones is a lot of Japanese tours. They'll have a whole tour bus. When you see one tour bus parked outside, it might not mean much to you, but that could be 40 rooms. Pow, gone. And so this alternative does offer increased capacity of rental units in our region for tourism. And obviously expanded variety and experiences. You get in those neighborhoods. These are really benefits. A lot of these are heavy for the user and maybe not as much for the neighborhood. But, you know, I feel remiss if we didn't at least touch on that. When Milena gets juice again, we'll. So, a little bit of greatest hits here locally and then far reaching. We wanted to point out Lake Placid, well, regionally, well, locally was probably, they've spearheaded this, and you can all imagine why. Tourism there is their main attraction, and it is changing. Anecdotally, the folks I've talked to who live there and also rent there, and fellow planners and folks on planning boards in that community will all attest that the issue of tourism and people selling their homes and community change, drift into a different type of neighborhood is occurring there. And so they dove in, and the sidebar is also, I don't know if you were gonna say this, Rodney, but they also wanna collect money. There's a financial benefit to that local government to get their hand on that too. And they have a lot of infrastructure to take care of, so there is a valid reason they're willing to collect
The
that.
other thing is that Lake Placid and Saranac Lake, one of the things that you raised earlier, they're having a very difficult time with housing stock. It is very difficult to go and buy a home or even rent something long-term there. There's not a lot of availability.
A home for less than $1.7 million.
Yeah. How much of it has to do with this issue, I don't know, but it's got to play somewhere.
I think more than it does in the town of Plattsburgh is playing a role there. And, you know, they have some interesting components to theirs. I printed it out, it's right here, if anyone wants to see it, we can pass it around. But, you know, they drill in a little more heavy on the inspections, and they really do permit, they go out, well, the law reads that they go out with their codes officers, and really drill down and inspect for smoke detectors. Their law is surprisingly heavy on a lot of the life safety stuff that I haven't seen in many others. But they get into, you know, 3-night minimum, they're trying to keep that character. I think when you were asking about whether the difference in length of stay, they apparently see that if people stay longer, maybe it changes their behavior, maybe it's geared towards more families instead of the 2-night party. I'm not sure what their reasoning was, but they've adopted that as a list. In Lake George, they completely don't allow it in their residential districts or their land conservation districts. But
What do they use? Local law?
yes, this is passed in the local law as well. And, but it's not that they don't allow it anywhere. I believe it's in their neighborhood commercial or commercial places. You would have apartment units and commercial, maybe 1st-story commercial, 2nd-story residential. So they allow it there.
Have you talked to them?
No,
I'm wondering how they're finding enforcement.
probably extremely difficult.
But
They found you, Drew? And it is difficult. Lake George is also unique in that they don't have local property tax. To the best of my knowledge, they are all sales tax because they're tourist based. So they probably, speculation as a community, is probably important to them to
they have their own PD too.
True, I mean, they can enforce in other ways. The
Yeah.
town of
So,
Plattsburgh,
but-
in case anyone knows, does not.
But again, putting it in perspective, again, we're reliant on a county structure for the sheriff's department and state police, a little bit different when you have your own police department, in addition to codes officers, et cetera, so.
In San Francisco, almost probably entirely because of housing stock and changing community
Well,
character.
this is where it started.
They had
Airbnb started in San Francisco in 2007.
And kind of the spearhead of some of the most strict regulation too. I mean, 275 days out of the year have to be owner occupied. People are becoming really clever about how to work around that, but they try to enforce that as best they can. Maximum 90 days of occupancy. And many, if you can, Google it, go look at theirs. I mean, the fees associated with it and then the inspections are just incredible. I can say we'll never adopt that because we can't afford to go out and enforce that many regulations. We don't have the infrastructure to do that level of
Unless you want to hire 4 more of us.
Well,
I was working 24 hours. a
I'm
day.
sorry, I probably shouldn't have spoke for the board. I would presume you're not interested in hiring 4 more codes officers just to enforce short-term rentals, but
Don't know what's wrong with
perhaps.
it.
They can create themselves, why not? Want to move on? So, us. So we talked about some of those policies. I think next we're gonna look at tools, right? The individual components of those. So each of those regulations are made up of the toolbox, the different methods, those laws. I will pass this around if anyone wants to look at it, because this one was Lake Placid, actually. It's pretty robust.
It's still in draft form.
Okay, yeah, keep that. So, one of the most popular is the first step, property registration and the permitting process, affidavits about their minimum concerns. In lieu of actual on-site inspections sometimes, we've seen that they will sign that, yes, they have the minimum smoke detectors, fire extinguishers, carbon monoxide, whatever the regulation is, that they have that. So they sign off as the property owner that we've done that. And then, on the other hand, then there's straight up inspections. Probably the most powerful tools that seem to mitigate community concerns are the minimum owner occupancy. Is this actually just totally unoccupied and really all it is a rental property? Or do they live there most of the time but make some extra income off short-term rentals? And then maximum consecutive guest days. And this is done in really clever ways, any way you can think of. Max total, 90 days, San Francisco.
I would think a minimum might be more appropriate.
Yeah, so you have the minimum, the maximum consecutive guest days is also, and that doesn't actually drill down to what I guess we were trying to get at. It's more about, is there a duration in between where people aren't staying there? So, can you have 12 days of rental, and then you must not rent again for 14 days? And that is, in some places, help mitigate.
That's a tough enforcement.
I agree, but as an attempt to keep community character more single-family residential and not turnover where, these folks mentioned, every weekend it could be somebody different. So the intent of that regulation is to break up the stays where someone you don't know is there. And then the local one, the most powerful one probably locally within neighborhoods, is homeowners associations and deed restrictions, because those have nothing to do with the local government, they have nothing to do with codes enforcement, and if you have an active homeowners association, or if you're in a subdivision that actually had deed covenants, or would enforce them locally amongst those property owners, they can be, that could be prohibited locally by deed covenant.
I got a question for Margot on that, because there is an HOA there. Have they addressed this?
I do not believe, but as you know, it's not a requirement to be a participant in the HOA there.
Yeah, okay.
It's by suggestion only, so they're working to get some teeth in it, but not as of yet. I think we're, the cat's out of the bag now, so.
But they can come back,
On the
chase
other
after.
hand, any covenants, I think Cliffhaven has covenants,
Yes,
and I think they are what they are, and that would only cover whoever was coming in now. If you rewrote that covenant, it would only,
You can't grandfather.
I
mean, you would have to, it would only,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, yes, they can't
Would only
hang their
cover
laundry
anybody
out,
new
but
if
that's
I
what
bought
they
a
were
place.
thinking about when they structured it.
They didn't
Exactly.
contemplate,
No,
Airbnbs,
so that would have to, that would only hold to anybody new,
Yeah,
if they were to restructure that.
Right, but what's happening is the houses are being purchased recently and converted into it. And then again to Margot, once Rodney's group gets a hook into New York City, there won't be an affordable piece of lakefront in this community. Because the money comes out of New York City, are just gonna, boom, and that's gonna send residential impact on the water up.
when's that gonna happen, Rodney?
It's gonna be any day, careful, Margot.
Okay. Checking.
I'm not sure,
Right?
but I think
Your turn
use,
to move.
I think use of the beach at Cliff Haven, I think is part of the HOA. I think you have to be a homeowner there. So I wonder how that would play into it, because I imagine people visiting and using the Airbnb there are probably making use of that beach.
Oh,
Well,
yes.
there are community people from the town and the city that park their boats there that aren't living in Cliff Haven. So I mean, they're really, it's been loose for so long, and I think people try to catch up with what's happened, and which makes it, the whole thing a lot more difficult to manage.
The other thing too, if it's, I assume if it's a covenant, and Brian, maybe you know more about this, that was done by the developer, if the police aren't gonna enforce it, it has to be enforced by the people who live there, and you're gonna have to hire your own attorney, and somebody comes to use the beach on a weekend, by the time you go through this process, they're gone.
Yeah.
But Ronnie, I think, speaking to that though, is a couple things. One is, for someone that is doing a development though, I think what we're hoping to do is to potentially provide information packets. We've had some people that have done some really nice subdivisions. That might be, something that encourages people to wanna move in there because they know that that person has put some of those covenants into that
That's
Oh, I
property.
agree, I wouldn't wanna discourage that.
So, again, it's because we're talking about the no silver bullet approach, and you're right though, it's the person that's gonna have the civil actions against them though are not going to be the person that's there for the weekend. It's going to be the property owner, because they're ultimately responsible for their activity while they're at their property. So, and we've had some conversations with some of the homeowners associations or folks that have reviewed the deed restrictions, and I think Brian brings up a really good point, and that is the areas of the town that you're seeing high activity in right now, even though it may not capture all the activity that's going on now, it prevents the future, or potentially prevents the future, activity going any further in that area. It's kind of like putting a moat around the activity. So, because some people they're going in, they're just buying homes, and they're saying this is gonna be the sole, resource that they're gonna put forward on.
Is the homeowner liable for anything that happens on the property? In other words, the homeowner doesn't even live there anymore, just renting, second home, whatever it is.
Talk about Drew's example, right?
Well, so to speak. Is the homeowner liable then, for violations of local laws, et
I
cetera?
think so.
It'd be interesting to see how the insurance policy deals with that.
But I know, like, so when we do anything, and so, within zoning, within New York State codes, everything goes to the property owner. So, therefore, they're the ones that are ultimately responsible.
And who would enforce something like that?
It depends on where it is. It depends on, how it is dealt with, if it's dealt
We have so many rental units now with absentee landlords, regular rental units that don't follow any of the codes or anything. So, I'm just curious.
What codes do they not follow?
Well, they don't have heat, and, you have to sign a lease and they don't have heat for the winter, or they don't have, this proper sewer, different things like that.
But I guess, in the example that Drew just gave, let's take a Airbnb where noise is a problem. Police come, they tell them to quiet down. If they don't, an hour later, the police are back out there. Say the third time they come out, they're probably taking action. In that case, they're not taking action against the homeowner, they're taking action against the people who are creating the noise. On another example, they're probably taking action against the homeowner, depending on what the issue is.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm getting at is if a person's doing that, it's supposed to be a residential zone, it's R1, R2, and that's going on, then they're violating noise ordinance or they're violating something else. It should be the responsibility of the person that's renting it who doesn't live there.
It depends on, as you said, if it's a noise ordinance situation, then the police are gonna be going directly with that. If it's, say, a property maintenance issue, then that would be going to the homeowner.
What about a dog attacking another dog or?
That's,
I think a good example is, a lot of times you hear about, underage drinking, you know, and what will often occur is the person that is underage will receive certain citations and issues, but then the property owner or the adult will also, so I think there could be multiple situations. The owner of the property might be in violation of things, as well as the person that's doing the activity. But I think there's so many variations, Tom, that it may be a case-by-case situation.
And it's also addressed by other laws.
Right.
That are
New York
completely
State
different,
laws,
a completely other set of property laws and
Exactly.
insurance laws that wouldn't even be affiliated with the law, and we couldn't actually probably regulate that. Straw poll, while we're collecting data, because, you know, we won't keep people here all night, but who thinks, they're just convinced, short-term rentals, the town of Plattsburgh should just not allow them? And it's okay, this is just fact-finding and a thought
I mean,
process.
a total ban.
Total ban, not allowed in the town. And these aren't binding, people can change their minds, you know? So, but Tom, do you really feel that way? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the only way to regulate it.
Okay.
It's the only way you could possibly regulate it without violations in there, is if it's not allowed, period.
I would say, if I had to choose between a total ban or allow them everywhere, I would choose a total ban. But I do think that you can create a set of circumstances where they might be acceptable. So I would rather not go with a total ban unless you can figure out a good way of regulating it.
And so the other side, who thinks that they should be unregulated completely, and hey, this is the free market world, you own your home? You kind of feel that way? Yeah. And so, well, very few at both ends. Who thinks along the lines that some sensible regulation that's, you know, strategic and surgical, is warranted?
And doable.
And doable.
enforceable.
It has to
And
be,
enforceable.
it has to be all the best we can. I think, I like seeing that the majority is somewhere in the middle. We don't constitute all of Plattsburgh either, but,
I don't think we would have complaints if there was a consideration given by the guest to the other members in that community. That's what you find
Well-
is lacking, is the tenant who's coming in is not giving consideration to the neighbor next door.
Melania, could you go back to impacts?
Sure.
So I don't wanna let anybody off the hook without trying to pick your brains. So, you know, you had, some of the issues that we had were noise. I'm gonna give you my opinion. I think that we won't be able to do much in an Airbnb, a short-term rental, local regulation that fixes that. We have a noise ordinance, and that would only be enforced by the county sheriff in this town. Like any other place, when the dog's barking all night, when somebody has the radio, that's currently enforced that way. That's my personal thought. That doesn't mean we could be crafty somehow, but I think that when you blend, try to add additional regulation that's covered in another law, you muddy the waters. And we have the honorable Mr. Patno, and he's
It's all
retired,
subject
but
to interpretation, you know, when you have that, you know, which law is precedent. It is, the overlap would be untenable.
for those who don't know, Mr. Patno is a former judge, retired.
Yeah, you typically don't see a separate noise level allowed for one use versus another use. It's a blanket, and that's why they usually do it based on a local law, not through
But
zoning.
these things aren't enforced either.
And we
And
don't-
even if a ticket is written, it's usually dismissed.
We don't, and You know, we don't wanna get in the business of,
Kevin, not in your court, right?
They were dismissed. Very often it wasn't hugely enforced. I think maybe out of 180,000 cases, I might have had 4 noise ordinances that were violated. And that was a relatively new, local law, so, I mean, it wasn't.
So you're saying that you just don't see many of those cases?
Just don't see.
But we also have lighting laws, we have, and they are not enforced. What I'm saying is practically impossible to enforce these.
Well, I mean, you enforce it, but can you enforce 100%? No, I don't think any agency, the FBI, anybody can do 100%, enforcement of absolutely
There
everything.
must be that percentage that you can't enforce that are always complaining to me that.
Well,
Absolutely.
an example is, and noise is a classic one, because a lot of the noise ordinances, and I'm not sure about the town of Plattsburgh, is based on a decibel level.
It is.
It's quite possible that the decibel level is being exceeded at some point when the complaint is being made. By the time you go out with a decibel meter, it's perfectly acceptable. And so how do you enforce that? Did they violate it? Yeah, they probably did, but it's not really enforceable.
Well, the big one that you can't do anything is community character. It's gonna ruin the community character.
actually, Tom, I'd like to jump right there, because I would say we can't do anything about noise within the law. That's already taken care of in another law that needs to be enforced on its own. Waste is pretty much already taken care of through health code and provisions of zoning, that we have clear regulations about what to do with your waste, and you have to clean up your lot if it doesn't comply. Parking typically will either be self-regulating, although we could add that one in, but it's usually self-regulating, but we don't allow parking in yards and such already, so pretty much covered through other components. I think community character is.
If the parking, it becomes a problem, could a homeowner, say a next door homeowner, call someone to come and tow the cars away? Is that?
I don't think you could call somebody to tow the cars away. It gets down to, is it an
I mean, I don't
unregistered
know.
vehicle?
I said that, you didn't say it's unregistered vehicles.
Debbie, I think if it's like, if there was so much traffic that they're now blocking
You
your,
can't get through
your driveway, and, I mean, like, or they're parking on your lawn, I think there's some elements to that.
But we have seen, so parking's not a done deal, because you can, regulate per guest or whatever. Again, it's the enforcement issue. But, Tom, community character, I actually think there is a solid one for that, and it's everything that we already talked about. It's not that could be absolutely no community character impact, but if you limit the days a year that it can happen, you're certainly gonna mitigate a change in community character.
But haven't you already done that when she can't let her daughter go out and play outside?
We don't have a regulation right now. So I don't know what the impact of having a regulation would be, because we don't have one. Right now, it's the Wild West, and.
But you're saying it's changing the community character. That changes the community character.
Oh, no,
When
no,
you
no,
live in
I
a
asked-
small neighborhood where you used to be able to let your kids go out, Smoky Ridge Drive is a perfect example. Once they completed it and it wasn't dead end, and cars whizzing through there, they wouldn't let the kids go out and play.
Tom, I think we just misunderstood each other.
Okay.
Short-term rentals absolutely can change community character. The question we were discussing was, can you create regulation that mitigates those impacts? And I think that we can. I don't have them all in mind.
There's an opportunity for us to explore that area
So,
further.
when you do explore it, you have to always realize enforcement of it. We can't just put things on the books and say, that, and then how do we enforce this action that we just.
And you gotta define what community character is, effectively.
Who's got ideas?
Every community has a character.
Yeah, and what
Yeah,
we're
I
looking
live
at.
next door to one.
But as well, and I think every individual has a different perspective of what that community character is.
What preserves that community character? Honestly, just as planner for the town, I just am trying to gauge some sense of where people are. Is 20 days a year renting your property too much? But is 100 too much? And you may not have thought through this, but I encourage everybody to do so and email me, because I really don't know where the community's at.
Is there parts of like the other, maybe some pull-out parts parts of other regulations that we looked at? Is there anything that anybody likes or doesn't like, or thinks would work or wouldn't work in this area, I guess, is part of the question too.
Trevor, what's interesting is, listening to Corey and Marco and Deb, especially Cumberland Head and Cliff Haven, as someone who kind of grew up in this area, by virtue of being here by the base, that community character developed almost multi-generationally.
Yes.
So, unless I'm wrong,
Yeah.
Correct me, but.
Yeah, it still is, yeah.
It still is, and I that's why I found it interesting to hear comments, and I'm glad people were here to comment on those areas, because those seem to be the concentrated areas that I'm being made aware of. It doesn't mean Ronnie, I don't know if there might be some more, but there was a character that was already preserved and has been built over a lot of time.
Right, the establishment of, let's say, Pinebrook, you know, and that community character of the openness of Cumberland Head, community character of the waterfront along Cumberland Head. I specifically design neighborhoods so that comparables are pulled from certain in the respective areas. So Cliff Haven, Champlain Park, they're all have a community character, but they all have a distinctiveness to it as well. So it isn't a one-shot blanket for the whole town. That's what it's based at. And we can go down to Quaker Springs and Quaker Highlands and then to the Maine Peru from Rodney's perspective. You know, again, each one of those communities have their own individual,
Okay.
You
And
folks,
there's communities within the communities as
Right.
well, you know,
That's-
so,
we'll never get perfect.
no, exactly.
But you folks mentioned something, that, like, if whether it's 1 day or 10 days, it really doesn't make you as homeowners feel any different about it, because it's always somebody different, right? You're probably never gonna be best friends with these folks, invite them over and have them as neighbors. Just because they're strangers, I mean, the real practicality of it. So what I hear just from you folks is, a maximum stay, or a minimum number of days a stay wouldn't help you guys alleviate your concerns, because having a minimum of a 5-day stay doesn't make you folks personally feel any better about it. Because it really, you know that they're gonna be still gone after 10 days.
And he has he rents out 2 separate houses.
It's 2 units?
Yeah,
Oh.
and he has 5 different properties on his land, so I don't know how many more are
I
coming.
can't keep doing it.
He has a studio that looks right into our house, basically, and a house that he has multiple different people in all the time. So it really is a revolving.
Okay, you guys just brought up a whole new issue, and we will try to absolutely wrap this up. If you guys wanna we had, done this from 6 to 8. We had a goal of 7:30, just in the middle. We're at 7:28, let y'all know. But you brought up a whole new issue, which, we didn't think of, density of the number of short-term rental units. If you have one in all of your neighborhood, no big deal, probably, the neighbor might not be happy. But what if you have 22 and there's only 7 that are still rentals? Because you just got to an issue that I mathematically don't know how I would solve for you. If we did max number of stays, if you rate, exactly, another thought experiment, is it number of max stays per unit or per provider?
Yeah.
So if he rents a 1 unit, he meets whatever criteria, but the other unit is staggered, you can still have that, so density of units.
So what you're saying is, we should create a category called compounds?
Yeah.
No compounds?
No, but, property would change, how many can you have per
Parcel?
parcel?
If there's maybe one thing that I could add, and I appreciate that you guys are bringing this up, but, you know, to maybe think about in your future conversations is the reason, from my aspect and what I'm seeing, is the reason why most of these things are becoming a problem now, where they weren't when it was the cabin by the lake that was rented out by the week, is in trying to figure out how to regulate this, trying to look at why people are doing this might help in some of the regulations, and trying to avoid the encouragement of people and businesses are doing this for a profit. They don't care about the neighborhood, they don't live here. They're outside people, for a large majority of them, not all of them, but the Airbnb had started out as you could rent your room out and you could help pay your mortgage, right? Or you could encourage trying to get some value out of your house, where now it's become a profitable enterprise where people are looking for communities where they can purchase houses and make $30,000 a year on this house or $40,000 a year. So to try and figure out, you know, from my aspect is to think about regulations that would discourage the direct use of a property strictly for profit by a large enterprise, right?
So
So that's the
that
owner
may be more along-
occupancy regulation.
So I think that is, that can be more of the overall number of days, because if someone's like, well, I can't rent it for more than 90 days, then that's not gonna be enough profit for me to be, you know, but yet, you know, someone that's looking to offset something else, or just looking, that may be enough days that they say, okay, well, I can do this, so I can think the days, so whatever it is, 90, 60, 20, you know,
Yeah.
whatever.
So would it matter whether they had a connection to community?
Hmm?
Or whether they're outside, that
I
never
think
lived in a
just-
community?
I think just thinking about what people are trying to do with the profit, they're strictly trying to make a profit on this area because they feel like there's a profit, or because like Drew has a family rental that he would like to not have to pay the taxes on all year, so he's gonna rent it out for a certain number of weeks or months to help pay for that, so that him and his family can still afford to go there and enjoy that. I mean, I think that that's a different situation than the people that,
Right, that-
especially in Cliff Haven, that are buying house after house, and they're forcing the neighbors to move out so that they can buy the house, so that they can rent it, so they can do it to the neighbor next door.
Absolutely.
This is kind of an odd thought, but if I owned a short-term rental and I wanted to rent it out for a week at a time, the 90 days would bother me. I would want it to be 91.
Oh, there we
Oh.
go. But,
There's a gentleman in Cumberland Head who has a lot of properties, and several of them are cabins on the lake. And of course, the time he wants to rent them is May to September, through September. You know, that's more than 90 days.
And that's where that staggering goes, where how many consecutive days can it be through that platform?
Some of them are fully winterized, and he can rent them in the wintertime, you know, so.
but that's where that's where what they're saying is now you're creating a business, so that's where we could discourage the overall profit of it, that you're having it so that you can have the property, but not necessarily be trying to make it.
The
a
concern
business.
was if you would have no regulations on the days at all, there might be a more proliferation of those, because people are going to buy more to make the money. If you set a limit, yeah, you may have a certain number out there already that are doing that, but at least you're not getting people after that regulation that would be buying them for that sole purpose.
It doesn't have this huge upside of, yeah, I can buy this house for X amount of dollars and rent for $2,000 a week and never even.
That's right, because I'm
Well,
limited
never
now
even
to only
said-
90 days or 60 days or whatever, you know, the time.
It's just, it's something that, like I said, think about the reason why these are becoming such a problem is profit based.
Well, going back, Trevor, you mentioned density. I do think that plays into it. I do think that there's certain communities, it just should be unacceptable. Because they're so, the density is so high, the units are so close together that it just has too much of an impact. So I would say that should be a factor in determining where you might allow it and where you might not.
Yeah, there's one of the ones that really shocked me is in New Orleans. There's whole neighborhoods that obviously after, devastation there, people went and bought up, no permanent residence, all short-term rentals, the whole neighborhood, so, and it's already a party town. And so there's whole neighborhoods now that are, I don't think that'll happen here. But we're a different town, and a different community, but that's an extreme example where that's happened, where cheap property, old flood properties, they've all been purchased and, some clever person purchased 10 at a time, and the whole streets are short-term rentals, year-round.
So one thing, I just wanted to clarify one thing. So we don't regulate the single-family units, but it seems like you have a property next to you that has multiple units, which is almost getting into the definition of a cabin colony, which if it is over the 11 people, it's a possibility we might regulate that situation.
You got somebody to call?
I think on his Airbnb, because I may have stalked it a couple times. Few mentions of the miserable neighbors in the comments, but that was after the dog attack. So, he advertises one as sleeping up to 9.
Okay.
That's one house. In the studio sleeps two.
Okay.
No, I think it's more than that.
Does that? That doesn't mean that there's ever two people in there. There's 6 people in there.
And then how many other units are there too? Because if you go over like 25 per day.
There's two what the town would consider single-family residences.
Okay. So it's a possibility.
Which unfortunately, it's hard to regulate. You can put a bunch of single-family residences
And
on
then
one
it's-
property.
Yeah,
You can put a bunch of two-family residences on one property as long as it meets setbacks.
yeah, and then it's still, so therefore, I mean, that's where it comes from our point of view, we don't, New York State doesn't require regulations of inspections until you hit 3 units in a single building.
Yeah.
Once you hit 3 units in a single building, that's what triggers your inspections for multifamily.
Drew, did you go through code school recently?
I think that's what you sent me.
At least 6 times.
I thought you were gonna correct him about that.
I think one of your best offenses is to make, if it comes down to it, the dog, the thing, and the comments on Airbnb saying, this is not a good place for us to rent. All of a sudden, that back feed from the tenants, the next person reading it goes, and they're gonna go find someplace else.
The neighbors don't want to
It's,
say.
you know, and having been a user, but I was a single person in a unit. I didn't bring 7 other people with me. I tried to be as minimally impactful to that neighborhood, being cognizant of this.
I'd say, I think I think in the other side, you do get people that will come and that you would be, as you said before, that wanna be in the neighborhood because they like that, they feel more comfortable, and they don't wanna be in the hustle bustle of hotel and all that. Unfortunately, you do get the bad, the other side of it too,
Right.
so.
How to control the potential of the client in this way.
So I think I kind of want to rein it in a little bit and probably start to pull this to a close, but I was wondering if there are any nuggets of wisdom or last thoughts. Our generous folks on the panel who were asked and then volunteered and then got reminded 5 times that please come and attend this and graciously did. Any thoughts you folks have about it? You don't have to, but I just thought I'd give you a little opportunity.
Well, I would say that I've heard enough negative comments for people coming into our office that I do think that there is an issue out there. And I do think that communities should seek to regulate these. I'm not saying that they should be banned, because I do think there's a place for it. But as we've demonstrated today, there's a lot of different issues associated with this. But I do think it's time that they be regulated on some level.
Should it be done on a county level as well?
No, I disagree on the county level.
Usually the province of land use regulation is done on a local
Well, I
municipality.
also think the problem is also if you go to
The
the
county is
level-
very hesitant about stepping on the rights of the local municipalities.
And what's
In the
like,
spirit of home rule, we want to do it ourselves.
Well, yeah, because, if the county does it, you have no control over what the rule is then.
and it's not applicable to Osceola Forks or to the town of Clinton as it is to the town of Plattsburgh or the town of Peru.
We know our-
Each one of those areas has their draws, and each one of those communities should be addressing it.
I know a few years ago,
Maybe in
Tom,
a similar manner, but not at the county level.
a few years ago, someone came to the county to try to get the county legislature to pass a countywide noise ordinance. And I think the gentleman was from Black Brook. And because they didn't have any and they weren't interested in implementing one. And the legislature decided, no, we don't want to do that. There are already some communities with noise ordinances. We don't want to get in their area and regulate something that they may want to do individually in different ways.
Rodney,
Question?
I want to address one thing though. I would agree that it should stay at the local level for many, many reasons, but the county is involved right now in receiving some of the bed tax, from this. So I'm just going to throw out for consideration, and we can flesh this up, because there has to be a partnership for this. Some of the monies that are coming in from that may be beneficial for a short period of time to either do some studies or other resources to address some of these areas in some of our communities, so that you know, that we can find the most beneficial tools, rather than having fallen the burden of the municipalities by themselves. That might be a way that the county can partner with us to say, okay, there's a need, you know, it's filling in with, you know, be it the fishing tournaments, or, you know, graduation, or shooter, or, you know, like, but I think that's a way that we're always going to be reliant on our partner, the health department, et cetera. But I don't think we wanna lose the full control, Tom, to bring it down to the local level so that we can address the unique characteristics of Cliff Haven to Cumberland Head to Morrisonville to Katyville, you know, and everything
But
in between.
as long as we're doing that, then we should be getting some of that tax money back. See, the county should be giving us that tax money back, or generating all this stuff.
The county would be a good vehicle or an assisted vehicle, but the final solution has to start with the ground level. It really does, because enforcement of this, again, starts at the ground level.
Because the county will lose, if communities begin to wholesale get rid of this, that money goes away for the opportunity to serve the need. And that's why I say if there's a way to do some partnership, I don't know what the answer to it is, I'm just throwing it out into the ether of the world
I
right
think
now.
the legislature might be receptive to
Yeah.
devoting some funds,
Yeah.
you know, to developing a model,
Yeah.
law that could deal with, short-term rentals. And the model law could be tinkered with differently by different municipalities who wanna apply it in different ways. Yeah.
So, from what I've heard tonight is, it was, I think, the right thing to do to begin this conversation, gather people together, heard a lot of agreement that perhaps something is necessary. The issues are there, the concerns, and you know, we've talked a bit about them. I'm actually not gonna go here, because this is the pathway in the future, and what I've heard, and I'll have to speak with my bosses, but it feels like we got more research to do, and more conversations to have similar to this, before we even talk about these next steps, which are our pathway to regulation. This is how we would go about doing this, and more public input. But before even getting there, I think we need a little bit more of this. Yes, Tom?
But is Drew the only one? I mean, did we invite some of the other people that have
We
these?
invited a lot of people, and a lot of people couldn't attend. So we did, and perhaps this needs to be an on-location type of conversation. But what it also makes me realize is it was right to do this because the issues are so vast. We have health and safety issues, we have community character issues, property value issues, taxation issues, happiness, you know, public enjoyment. So it covers the whole thing, which is why it's very difficult to regulate. And I would prefer probably not regulating it to doing it really bad. And so I'd like to do it really good. So the point is, I think we'll need to do more research. I'd like to thank the town board members for allowing us to have this time and tasking us with to do it.
Well, thank you for anybody else coming.
Thank you to our guests who lent us their
Thank you.
expertise.
Yes, thank you very much.
So we're gonna, because we do have a work session, we're wrapping up, but I just want to extend my personal thanks to Trevor, Melina, and Michelle.
Yes, thank you.
You know, by far, I'm just gonna take a moment to, and also Drew as well, and Brian. We have some of the best professionals of any municipality. And, you know, they work diligently and they work very, very hard in their subject area, but we also benefit from the sense that they cross-pollinate their expertise. And, you know, when each one of them does either professional development or finds an article, they share it with one another. And the reason I'm letting you folks know that in the general public is sometimes you folks will come across something. Don't hesitate to forward it to us. Debbie, I know you forward things to me from time to time, and I'm not saying that's snarky. We appreciate that because you can't see all things, and you don't know what you don't know. And the way that we're looking at it, and I'm bringing Vicky up again because she is a person in the area of hotels that personally she's done a lot of research on it. I mean, she's very, very passionate about this. So as we continue to develop this and have some more conversations, the one group of people that I would like to make sure that we bring into the conversation, because they may provide perspective and knowledge on something that could benefit us all, is the renters. so that we can do something that locks in, because ultimately, if they're going to be allowed to do this, we need to make sure that we find a way to communicate to them, right? Because if your neighbor is on one of these Airbnbs or VML or whatever it is, and they don't know about the rules and regulations, they're still gonna drive you crazy. I mean, and unless you're nailing them on their front door, you know, these are the things you need to do. So I'm just asking is, become kind of ambassadors for the cause, share it with us. There was a sign-up list, get on the email list, we'll make sure to include you on things, thanks to our panelists. And then lastly, just for the town board members, we had minutes, monthly reports, a site report, and the agricultural, thing for the fair. It's nothing that you haven't seen before, so at this point, I'm just gonna call a close to our meeting at 7:46. All right, thank you very much, folks.
Thank you, everybody.
People who are actually, boots on the ground. Without people coming, we're not gonna get it right. That's my biggest, what might say, I'd rather have none than do that. And like, feel like, oh yeah, we got this.
Welcome to see
It's pretty good.